Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have Professor Pixel. Of course, I'm broadcasting to you from the Pine Hills Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida, where Max and Daisy, my German Shepherd, Red Czechoslovakian dogs, keep us safe from all the nonsense that's out there in the world, too. And there's actually Professor Pixel by the tiny lake on the acreage I have out here, some actual small citrus trees, particularly a small orange grove that I've been managed to keep, safe from the freezes. And that's important because we're going to go from Central Florida here on February 24th to the complete opposite part of the United States, seeing how it's February 24th, aka Twin Peaks Day. And actually, Twin Peaks is pretty interesting to talk about. And you and I have, in our review of season 1, 2, and 3, episode by episode, I thought it'd be kind of interesting to kind of take a look back since it's been a year or so since we've done it here. And just recognize a lot of people who've listened and watched this. This is a show that has a lot of cult fans too. It was a first watch for you, and I hadn't watched it since the '90s, so it's almost like a first rewatch for me too. Just want to talk a little bit about some things that stick out. Now we've had some time to reflect on season 1 and how it kind of compares to then when we watched it. Is it still the same? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it I'm over it? Would we watch it again? I don't know. What's your initial take on Twin Peaks now that we've digested, given it some time to, just sit there and gel?
Well, the first thing I want to go ahead and say is yes, I'm on camera. I know it's weird for video on here to have faces, but no, I'm on camera to show. I went ahead, got the plaid. I have my coffee and I have a donut. I am set for today.
Show the coffee, show the donut. There's the coffee.
There's a donut.
And there's the donut. There you go. Well, hopefully that's a mighty fine cup of coffee there. Yeah, coffee and donuts, something only Twin Peaks people would know. Yeah, so let me ask you, as I mentioned before here on the Xtreme Movie Show, when we cover things, I like to say we're 80s based because that's the decade I grew up as a teenager. And for you, that was more like the 2000s, 2010s. And so it's interesting getting a different generational look at it. And we definitely don't always agree on movies and shows that we cover here. And that's kind of cool. But I just want to ask, other than maybe like Game of Thrones or something like that, where people were watching season by season, or Walking Dead, can you really think of anything that compares to the amount of hype that Twin Peaks you can imagine had? Because I'm telling you, back then, week to week, locker room talk, cooler talk, coffee cooler talk, office talk, talk on everything. This show is made, into a cultural phenomenon. Anything compared recently to you like that?
Recently, no, there hasn't been a lot. I mean, if you go some places, you'll see some people that talk about that way about like Marvel movies and stuff like that, because that is basically a giant television series at this point. But no, you won't find a lot of television at this moment really talked about like this. I mean, some people will go ahead and say that about The Last of Us, the adaptation of the video game, which for the most part it's accurate, but it's still not the same as something like when you hear everybody was watching Twin Peaks and everybody was watching Game of Thrones. What's a show right now that everyone's watching and talking about every week, waiting for the next episode? Nothing. Other than our reviews for Dark Shadows, right?
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned Dark Shadows because that's a show that for the revival that we're almost done with that doing episode. So that's our current TV review. While we normally do movies and branch out in all sorts of areas, I think it's interesting because here we've talked about Kolchak, the Night Stalker. We've talked about Dark Shadows, and I like to say that without Dark Shadows, for the most part, in Kolchak, roughly in the 70s, it'd almost be impossible for, I think, to have the occult type things or even dark material like this being mainstream, and Twin Peaks found a way to do it. And I want to talk a little bit about, like, obviously Dale Cooper being the anchor of the show, because initially we see him after we find out that there's a dead girl murdered and dead like a fish wrapped in a bag of plastic. And it's pretty interesting how we get introduced to the characters, and I think the quirkiness about each of them that we come to know, even though they're not great, adds to it, because one of the issues I think we've mentioned before in recent shows and movies is if we don't like the character, it's kind of hard to kind of get behind them. But you and I talked about, like, say, on Dark Shadows, Hunky Man Meat doesn't really have a boy toy with him, friend that he can pal around with and we can watch their chemistry. Whereas when we talk about Twin Peaks, we talk about Truman and how he's got great chemistry with him and with Cooper,
Harry.
or yeah, and it's like you see things like this when they get together, and you're like, there's a certain magic in that too. And I'm trying to think of what makes that different than other stuff recently, and I don't have an answer.
Um, I just think that there is something to if we talk about David Lynch movies, we're not going to have a fun conversation because I'm not enamored by them like I was with Twin Peaks early on. But something about him doing television with, of course, Mark Frost, they were able to capture a certain feeling. And then the actors are able to bring to life this strange way of just working. Like, you don't really know anyone like Dale Cooper. In real life, you know no one like Dale Cooper, but you want to. You wish you had somebody that could take a sip and say, this is a damn fine cup of coffee.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I guess in today's world, there's a lot of terms being thrown about to describe behaviors. I never really thought of this when we were talking about Cooper and his, little quirks that he has, and everybody's got their own little exaggerated mannerisms or things in here, and I kind of like that. I'm not the biggest Lynch fan when it comes to some of his other movies, and while I do like Blue Velvet and a few others, and we'll watch them and appreciate the fact that the coherence isn't as important as the letting you see what goes on and letting your mind fill in the blanks. I do like that. I just think that Cooper might be somebody we could call in today's terms autistic or on the spectrum or this or that. And, before anybody gets triggered and tries to correct me on that, the bottom line is he's a smart dude. His brain thinks a little bit differently. There's an element of mysticism in it too. And I think that the weird thing to me is, in of course, the TV series season 1, I think it was 8 episodes we did. We see early on in one of the more iconic scenes. This scene I'm about to talk about, I think, is one of the ones that made people go, "Hey, this show's different." It's not just a detective, a mystery thing, which God knows there's been gazillions of those on television. It's the rock throwing scene where he puts everything on a chalkboard. I think they all get fed donuts. They're sitting there and watching this FBI guy that's supposedly really, really smart. And he leaves it to like a subconscious mind or whatever it is to throw the rock and knock the bottle over and allow that to do that. That is ridiculous and asinine, isn't it?
Yeah.
But somehow once that comes on, it seems to work. And I think that's when the switch got flipped when it comes to going, okay, this is going to be different. Not just stuff in the first episode, but later on. And I don't know, was there something new that made it seem different to you as we got along in those episodes?
I mean, in what you were saying, what I was to echo what I was talking about before, you want to see more with how Cooper goes ahead and figures things out. You are charmed in their thinking. You're charmed with the characters and, like you said, each of their quirks. I bet there are some people online that would go ahead and try to go ahead and say, yeah, no, I think Dale Cooper's on the spectrum. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't asked David Lynch.
Right.
But I think that with how Cooper solves the mysteries, we really were just enamored. And one of the things that really took away from us was when they kind of stopped that. We had other things layering onto that. But when Cooper was being a detective, that's when Twin Peaks was at its best.
I'm going to ask you to solo for a minute or two. I have an unexpected delivery at the door. My dogs are going nuts. So I'll fill in just a minute. I'll be right back.
No, he's gone. It's my show. It's funny because when Rob told me that it was Twin Peaks Day, I haven't been thinking about it a lot. I've been very busy between other streams that I'm involved with, and then on top of that, Dark Shadows is like my number one. But I've always had this interest in watching Twin Peaks before we started doing the reviews, and that's why we started, because I had an interest. He talked about seeing it before, and it's definitely one of those shows that I think about at this time that even when you take some time to let it fade away into the back, something triggers a memory and you'll remember this show. It's one of those shows that will stick with you your entire life for maybe a little scene, maybe something as big as who killed Laura Palmer. But I just really do love Twin Peaks because of that.
I think one of the things that I thought was interesting about somebody like you watching it for the first time, if you don't know anything about Twin Peaks and you just watch it and you get to the end of it and then you find out what happens at the end, you didn't see it coming, you had no idea, you almost couldn't believe it. And you and I always talked about some of the weird stuff in season 2, particularly the fight over the boy and who's going to be the baby daddy and some stuff. And while it was kind of horrendous, we found ourselves almost liking it almost at 1 or 2 points. But one
No,
point
that was you. That was you. It was always you.
well, when somebody gets spirited away into a doorknob, just I couldn't really
That was
believe it
funny.
at the time. Going, is what the hell are they trying to do to us as a watcher? The thing I got to bring up this is when you talk about Lynch and Frost, the director and primarily the writer, Mark Frost. Mark Frost obviously is somebody that fleshed out the majority of the canon for Twin Peaks, not necessarily David Lynch. And while his name gets, paraded around for it and all that too, there's sometimes a back and forth between Lynch and Frost about who's the real spirit of Twin Peaks. And we're not talking about necessarily the acting, we're talking about the history that they're trying to invoke and all that. And one of the interesting things about season 1 is not only do we get introduced to a lot of different characters who have their backstories still to be unveiled, and we see that in progress, not necessarily developing, which I think is kind of cool. It kind of shows that everybody has a little bit of their own dark or weird side. And to me, Mark Frost, I thought, did a great job of at least trying to do that. Because in season 2, obviously, we mentioned before how ABC, because it was such a popular show, said, well, we got to let people know, we got to capitalize on this and let them know who the killer is. And once we found out who, then it went downhill and there's a bunch of weird shit. And weird can be okay, but some of it's just a filler and it wasn't properly executed. And of course, sat on the vine until 2015. And it was very disappointing at the time, of course, just like Dark Shadows, the revival being canceled with the Gulf War and being moved around and those things being preempted, because it's been fabulous as well. And unfortunately, I think everybody just goes, oh, it's David Lynch, therefore it's automatically a genius. And he has that kind of cred, right? And here, here's a guy that already did Doom, Eraserhead, Blue Velvet, a few other films. And people who love him just say, well, Twin Peaks is just like it. But I will tell you this, it's one of the first shows that most people thought, wow, this is like watching a movie on television, but just broken up. And I think that was at the time that was kind of a novel idea, because if you ever did see a big budget movie on television, if it wasn't on cable but it was on regular networks, of course it would be broken up with commercials, right? Edited for content for time allowed. Sometimes you might have a two-parter one night, or and then this next night or the next week. And of course, the Sunday night at the movies or Saturday nights or whatever night with whatever channel, sometimes it would be that way. But I got to tell you, the idea of going, the way you choose to film and display something for a movie theater can now be done on television. Really, in my opinion, open up a door for a lot of the episodic TV that we would see like on HBO that people would come to know and love, whether it was Carnival or Deadwood or Rome, or of course, like we mentioned on more recent shows, Lord of the Rings, regardless of what you think of the content of it and everything else. But now that's kind of like the thing. They've almost gone the opposite direction where it's got to be episodic. We got to set up the world and we'll forget about the characters. And that's kind of the interesting thing is we almost come full circle on it too. And I'm just trying to look back at Twin Peaks and go, yeah, you're right. What you just said, there's going to be a few scenes that stick out. So, season 1 primarily. I want to talk a little bit about the first episode and then a couple key scenes for the rest of the first season, as far as what sticks out, what you want to kind of emphasize that sums up what you like about or that you find interesting. For me, in episode 1, there's a scene, and it's a clip that you can see, I think, on YouTube. Um, it's the shots of the high school when we find out that Laura Palmer's dead. When they do the roll call and it introduces some of the characters, and you see like some shots of the hall, and you see like I think 2 people like walking down the hallway, and the bell's ringing. Okay, everyone's got to go to class. And then there's one dude in the background. Of course, that's the way it's shot. He closes his locker and he kind of spins around and does this little breakdancing side shuffle. It's like, it's completely, he's not a character in the show. He's not anybody that we know. That wasn't a famous name doing a rib. But there was little quirks like that early on that you're like, what the fuck is that? When we're supposed to be thinking about this dead high school cheerleader, homecoming queen girl that's beautiful and pristine and all that. And of course, we find out she's not that way. That stuck out really early too. But for you, what are some key scenes that you want to talk about?
Um, yeah, I know I keep talking about Cooper because I just love Cooper that much. But one of my favorite bits is when we first are introduced to him and he's driving up and he goes ahead, pulls out his tape recorder. Diane, it is currently blah 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 blah, and it's going ahead and explaining pretty much where we're heading with this investigation. Because before that, this show, from what I remember, because it's been a while, I didn't rewatch. I wish I had more time to prepare because we could have rewatched the first episode, really dug in, at least for me. But with how the show starts out, and you have what's his name? Come on, no, before that, because it starts
Fisherman?
out the fisherman.
Pete
Yes,
Martell.
yes, Pete.
Catherine Martello's
Pete.
wife.
Because
Battle axe bitch.
his bitchy wife. But he's saying, I'm going to go out and go to fish. And when he goes out there, he is just utterly heartbroken once he notices the body. Because before that, you're not quite sure what's going on. But once the body's there and you can see how heartbroken he is, it's strange because when I remember when I first sat down and saw that, I was like, yeah, it's kind of traumatic, but why do you care so much? And then they go ahead and show that he's not the only one who cares. Everyone cares about Laura Palmer. Everyone is shocked by the death of Laura Palmer, and they're not quite sure how this information is going to play in their lives. This girl that doesn't even get to act for this first episode, really, is she is everything to us because of the town. They make Laura Palmer so important, and we don't even get a glimpse of her until really the end.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's interesting because we see the reactions of not just her dying, but that tells us how close those bonds are that she has with several other people. And of course, we get Dr. Hayward's a little quirky too, and he almost implies that they had a thing going on. And we find that they do, but it ends up not being a sexual thing, even though he's a little bit weird. So there's definitely all these red herrings to string you along as you know the mystery sorts to unravel a little bit. And of course, one thing that I found weird was nobody ever really talks about this, but Ronette Pulaski, she's a second girl where this happened to. I think it was in the first episode. We see her coming across the train tracks, and we've got that fantastic music. And the pilot was shot over there. Plus, you know, outdoor scenes. A lot of stuff was filmed indoors, of course, the inside stuff. But it just, like I said, filming in a natural location where you're at is always, to me, the best thing to do. Forget the CGI and everything else that happens today. It just lacks a certain feel to it. Seeing her just kind of whatever, and we know something bad's happened to Laura Palmer. We're going, well, shit. Now we see, you know, another young woman that's been affected by it. You know, how are they related? Do the girls know each other? Your brain automatically, instantaneously fills all those little things in. And like we said, the intensity of the emotional response from everybody about Laura and what Laura meant to them. We see that Laura, you know, delivers stuff, you know, to like, you know, food shelter pantries. That becomes a theme in season 2. We, even though she's the cheerleader, of course, what does the cheerleader always, you know, have a relationship with? As the football captain. We see Bobby Riggs, you know, who we find out is not exactly on the up and up, and it's a nice unfolding of stuff because we don't know it, but they do such a good job of not really talking about it like a lot of shows do, where everyone always talks about the other people in relationships. Here we watch them doing things. And I think that's one of the big differences between a lot of these TV shows, whether they're reboots and all the stuff, whether it's, you know, Wednesday or Sabrina or God forbid Nancy Drew, which has nothing to do with the actual detective before, or even the Hardy Boys reboot. Any detective show or any show that they just sort of take the source material and bastardize it. You just notice in a lot of these TV shows, everyone's always talking about, you know, other people, and it's like you're writing what's supposed to happen rather than just having a scene and letting people watch what goes on. And that's the beauty to me of Twin Peaks and treating what you're putting on television like movies. You don't have to dumb it down. And we see like Bobby Briggs acting kind of all hyped up or whatever like that. We go, well, yeah, he's on a cocaine binge because he's dealing it. We find out it's related to other people that are involved. Plus, he's screwing the really hot chick at the diner who's super sweet and all that too. And there's a lot of these adult themes in it. And I just, again, I'm still kind of surprised that when we watched it a year ago, how well all these things going. But ultimately, I'll say this. I think this performance of the whole show, though, even though Kyle's the most beloved one, it's got to be Leland Palmer, the guy who plays him. I mean, the guy just,
Yeah.
does a phenomenal job with it. And it's like, we know you're going to get red herrings in shows. You're going to get the supernatural element in here. You're going to get the serial killer angle. You're going to get the FBI stuff with the letter under the fingernail, that's like a high-tech thing. And at that time, that was somewhat relatively new. Now everybody always knows everything about serial killers and it's glamorized. But back then, I'm like, holy shit, that's just good. That's just good stuff. But yeah, it's just a nice way, I think, of storytelling. And I actually have to give Mark Frost a lot of the credit. That's not to downplay Lynch's contributions to the way it looks. But when it comes to stuff that Mark Frost has done, I mean, people forget that he's done a lot himself. And I don't know. You and I actually covered season 3, which took this 25-year leap in the forward. And it took, as we called him, Dougie Dale and Doppeldale, and kind of used the same principle of what Twin Peaks was. But once you understood what they were trying to do, it wasn't going to be exactly the same. It made sense, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, other scenes you want to talk about are just little nuances for Twin Peaks.
Well, I do want to talk about how in the first, I know you brought up the high school before, but thinking about it now, we do kind of eventually forget the school angle of it. Like it just fades into the background. But them going to school and learning about Laura Palmer, what was his name? Who we hated. You hated especially.
What do you mean?
Trying to think of his name. Yes.
In school?
Yeah. He has a song. Come on.
He has a song? What do you mean he has a song?
Not in this episode. You know who I mean. You son of a bitch. Please.
I'm drawing a blank because I'm listening. Give it to me.
I can't remember.
Oh no.
It's been a while. Oh, James. Holy crap. James.
Oh, just you. James.
Just
James
you.
Hurley.
He has a song,
the biker
you know?
guy that we find out actually was getting kind of simped out or simped on by Laura Palmer with Bobby Briggs, and you're like, well, this makes sense. And Laura's really playing the field. She kind of, was not right or whatever. But yeah, James Hurley, and James.
We despise him. We despise him utterly. He was just not a good character. But going ahead and seeing the reactions of them all throughout school and how the school goes ahead and, well, we're going to go ahead and cancel for today. But thinking about it, especially at that point, because we only get maybe 2 more episodes where they actually have something that's substantial happening at the school. In that first episode, I remember thinking that was going to have a lot more to do with, well, the show. Because it is ultimately, while the detective angle is the thing that we're following, when we're talking about Laura's friends, you would imagine that we'd be sticking there. We'd be sticking where they should be. But no, it kind of gets forgotten about later on.
Yeah, and we don't get the catty, bitchy girl stuff or whatever. The peeling back of the layers to me is the most fascinating part. Like for example, when
Audrey.
Audrey's one thing, and the whole crush she has on Cooper is kind of neat because she's almost old enough, and that is a thing. Those things do happen. Even though they didn't consummate the relationship or whatever, they kind of blew it off in season 2, and that was a weak effort because she was really, really like. But then when you have like Donna, and the whole idea of her kind of trying to figure out on her own because she was one of Laura's friends that's kind of cool, because in today's world, you'd think, oh, you're not going to have that with showing teenage women or girls, in the relationships. It's usually combative, fighting over a guy and stupid shit, and it's not like that. So it's cool. And then I also think about how we find in a couple episodes going undercover at the perfume counter,
Yeah.
and how that turned into where trafficking was going on, I'll simply say, and how it's related to other people that we see, including Bobby running drugs, like I say, and how things are related. And then, like I say, season 2 just with taking Leo and turning him into vegetables, not funny. They really let drop the ball on it, but I'm telling you, season 1 was so strong. People couldn't wait until see season 2. Just it had that much momentum going to it. So the peeling back, like, I think is great. And then, of course, once you let the cat out of the bag, that's hard to recover from it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that is the main thing. And while you were saying this, I was thinking what we really need to go ahead and discuss is the fact that once they were rushed, they were done. The show was
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
The whole problem is they did not have their time, because that's the whole thing with season 1. While we're going ahead and having a lot happening, a lot of characters are introduced, a lot of things are going on, it's still taking its time. It's finding its way through the mystery by going ahead and, like you said, peeling back the layers. What's going on in the town, in the certain areas of the town that are maybe not so not for the common eyes, and then the Bookhouse Boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because really, it's just these small things that they were building up with how they wanted to expose us to them. And then when they have to show us the murderer in season 2, that's where the show falls off. That's where it's done. It's over.
Yeah. And when everybody's layer gets peeled back, we always talk about how some people get rushed, and you might go from like level A to level C in terms of like how far along you think you know a character. Then we start to realize someone like a Dr. Hayward may not be very involved, but early on you don't know that. So, the characters that get a little bit more attention in the first few episodes and only some middling attention towards the end of it, you go, okay, I can see where they're not that important, but to give a lot of them at least an angle or something to do in season 2 was kind of cool. Just some of it didn't work, but it did made you feel like you were exploring the area of Twin Peaks too. But when you add a lot of humor and goofiness into it without that sense of dread that I think season 1 really captures a lot of, I think that's I think that's a bit of a downfall too. And for example, I'll bring this up too because to me, I don't think this is meant as laughs, but it's definitely different and quirky in the way Lynch does things. But back then, showing a transvestite on television, and of course, we're talking about Denise coming up and being friends, and them having a backstory with Agent Cooper, and they allude to a little bit and all that. I thought it was pretty kind of cool. Actually, it was different. I think they weren't being distasteful about it. David Duchovny would go on, of course, to later fame in the X-Files and other things too. Californication was another show he's known for. But I just liked Duchovny's relaxed portrayal of it and everything too. And I thought, okay, this is different. And I think what it does is it tries to show the FBI in a bit of a competent yet different light in their methods and stuff like that are supposedly top shelf, whereas like a podunk town like Twin Peaks is supposed to be a small slice of Americana that nobody really knows or remembers, yet some of hell familiar with, that they just can't do as well as the FBI. That's why Agent Cooper has to come in. Of course, to me, I just think Bobby Briggs's father, who we see a little bit of, was also a phenomenal side character as well too. And of course, he gets, how do I say this, roped into some extraterrestrial stuff. And, it's kind of cool conspiracy stuff that strings us along a little bit. And then, of course, we have the whole creamed corn creating doppelganger thing, too, that's only mildly alluded to. But I don't know. Again, going back to season 1, it's probably one of the best TV shows, start to finish, of a season one that I've ever seen. I'm a big fan of The Prisoner, although there's a lot of filler episodes in that, so there's definitely some misses. Even some of the weakest stuff from season 1 is still fairly strong and entertaining, and it amazes me how we can go back and talk about it, review each of the episodes, and still kind of find different connections. And whenever we talk about this kind of free form and people chime in with their ideas and stuff, it's like, hey, I never thought of it like that before. And outside of something really hot like Star Wars, there's really nothing deep about it, right? Or Jaws. And it's cool when people talk about their scenes, but there's nothing more to explore. And I think that's one of the best things about the way Mark Frost populated the characters and their side stories and allowed them to unfold at their own pace, is it gave us something to talk about that had nothing to do with the death of Laura Palmer. We would find out who that was by discovering who all these other people are. So Laura's death and character really is an anchor for us to have to say, well, let me try to pay attention to Bobby or Audrey, or okay, Audrey has this dance. That's kind of weird. I didn't know that about her. So, okay, maybe I'm kind of hot for her now. Okay, wait a minute. I like how Leland Palmer's singing kind of a goof, and yet now he's kind of this and that. I love how his wife's kind of sees visions like that. What the hell's going on with that? What the hell's with this damn white horse? You know, it's pretty kind of cool. And again, just focusing on the part of Mark Frost here, not Lynch. Hill Street Blues, some people consider as the greatest TV show of all time, definitely one of the most well-written ones, and that's what Mark Frost cut his teeth on. So this guy brought a lot of hardcore chops into Twin Peaks, and it definitely shows to me. So not being the biggest Hill Street Blues fan or watcher of the show, at the time it was a procedural, so the guy knows what he's doing. He knows how to write stuff for television to get it unfolded in an hour or so. But yeah, I mean, Twin Peaks Day, man, every time it comes on, there's just something about it. It's got that old-fashioned term romanticism to it, where even though there's that sense of dread hanging over it, the music's great, the shots are great, even the stupid friggin' traffic light that we talk about, and the quirky stuff you mentioned, the coffee, and the human things about it too is really, really, really kind of cool. Let's start wrapping things up here a little bit. What else would you want to talk about before we close shop?
I wanted to touch upon what you said about oh, you just said it and it just left my mind. Oh, because you were saying about Mark Frost and his writing, and he went ahead and he was able to bring these characters while obviously actors have to put some work into it. No, I'm not going to take the full Hitchcock. They are but cattle. But Frost writing these characters to go ahead and give them their verbal quirks, as it were. I think that he did an excellent job. And you know, as like you said, he has experience with television by the time he comes into Twin Peaks. So maybe he just when it comes to this, I think this is their baby. David Lynch and Mark Frost had a baby, and when
Yeah.
when they go ahead and discuss it, they have this love for it that when it's ripped away from them, that's what when it hurts us. And when we went ahead and went into season 3, because I do want to touch upon that, the show loses a good portion of itself because we take so much time to get back into Twin Peaks. But I finally remember what you said. The music.
Oh, yeah.
When that theme comes on, it evokes emotion. You are swept away. You get exactly what they wanted you to feel. And he's sadly gone from this world, the composer. But I remember seeing that video of him talking about creating this song with David Lynch right at his side. It's basically saying, keep going, stay that way, higher.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
It is beautiful. The entire piece is fantastic, and it's so tied to Laura Palmer, obviously, but the entirety of the show is just held in a single piece of music. That if we could play it right here without getting copyright struck,
Yeah,
it would help. It's food for the soul, and I think there's a good bit of that in at least classic Twin Peaks. And I just wish, and this, you said that this first season is fantastic, one of the best seasons of television ever, and from start to finish. The only problem that I have is that there isn't a finish. He gets shot at the end of season 1.
cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. That's right. Season 2 has a good cliffhanger as well, but it's a cliffhanger and it's just never touched, at least seemingly at that point, again. And then finally, it comes back for possibly the last time. And another massive cliffhanger where maybe they aren't exactly where they're supposed to be. Time-wise, what year is it? And Scream. And it hurts me in a way to love something so much that I pretty much know will never have a true end.
Yeah, and to kind of cap on that, I think the thing with season 3 of Twin Peaks that where you and I had a divergence early on, and we had noted that in our weekly review of that here on the Xtreme Movie Show, is that you mentioned it took so much time to get back to Twin Peaks, and I actually appreciated the less is more because I think successfully modernized what was going on with the same spirit of. So when you get back to Twin Peaks, you get that sense of urgency because again, some of the people aren't with us. The log ladies passed away right after filming. And everybody got a little bit of a chance to shine. James Hurley even seemed grown up a little bit more mature and not as annoying. And we get to see everybody, and that's kind of cool because the real life actors playing the same roles. They may not be around or they don't want to be a part of it. Or you don't want them to be a part of it. It's hard to kind of make that fit when you've created canon, right? But to me, the thing about it is, there's been talk of a potential season 4 with the code name Wisteria type of flower, whatever. I don't know if that's a Pacific Northwest type flower. I think maybe we're down here in Central Florida. Of course, we have tropicals, but I think a while back, Kyle and a bunch of other people associated with the show, all tweeted out a picture of a flower because they love it and they would do it. It's just who's going to put it on, and I don't know if that's going to happen or if it's got put on hold. That stuff super secret, top shelf kind of. No one's going to know, but it'll break if it is because people love it that much. And some people I think recognize, wait a minute, I don't know what the Showtime series is, Twin Peaks or Return. I don't fucking get it. And he really went for it with some of the scenes. And everyone's going to talk about episode 7 or 8 or 9, wherever it was that talks about the atomic war and how it's an allegory for, just evil being unleashed in general and those things that we only got the supernatural part of it in season 1 and 2 a little bit. But I'm going to go back to Major Briggs. The achievement itself is its own reward. And I think just watching, and like you said, having that ambience, having that emotional thing, you're going to remember the intensity of the emotion that you had watching it rather than specifics about it. So like I say, watching some two-timing Asian woman get spirited away into a doorknob is ludicrous, and I had forgotten about it, but now I'm like, oh yeah, that's a Twin Peaks thing. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense because, again, season 3, I think sums up perfectly. If you can tell something good enough or care enough about the characters, the plot can be meaningless. And I just kind of wish that in a way we almost never did find out the killer of Laura Palmer. And I think with Mark Frost having to kind of go the way he did to reveal it, like you said, it kind of lost everything. But I kind of think they tried to redeem themselves a little bit in season 3 with that angle. And it's tough, but were they successful in doing it? I think so, because definitely this is super popular on Showtime. And I think it introduced a lot of people, especially younger people, like, say, your generation, to say, okay, what the hell is this Twin Peaks? And why the hell am I going to watch it? I hear everybody tweeting about coffee, Twin Peaks Day, which is today, all this stuff. I just don't understand it. It's another one of those 80s things that people talk about how great the decade was. And I'll just let you close up here and describe for people of today what it's like to have a show like Twin Peaks back then compared to the stuff that's out there now.
What you just said about caring about the characters more than the plot, and you know how important storytelling is to me. I feel like you do have something there, because there is a bit of, while everything has to make its own weird sense, it has to be cohesive. You can't just have people sitting around in a corner. This isn't a podcast. This is a podcast, but this show isn't a podcast.
Right.
They can't be riffing at each other for a half an hour and call that entertainment. They have to genuinely make efforts at a story. But what you said about the characters mattering to us, even without that, us caring about Audrey later on, even though she starts out kind of cold and standoffish from everyone.
Yeah.
The depth that they have to build for each character, even especially Garland Briggs. He's a
Yes.
fantastic example, because before they really touch upon him, he just seems like a shitty dad to Bobby.
Yeah.
That's it.
Like, you almost excuse Bobby's shitty behavior, running drugs and being involved in a bunch of really
Because
bad
his dad's
stuff.
kind of crappy.
Right. But then you realize, oh, there's more to it than that.
Yeah, because Garland Briggs is built upon. Everything is built upon. But at the end of the day, I think that people of this generation, closer to mine, we won't have a show like this for at least a while. But as of right now, you got to dig back. You got to dig back, because that's where a lot of core entertainment, stuff that's going to last with you, is. And while we agree it does have its slumps, even at the end of it, where it's not really ending a story for you, where it's giving you these massive cliffhangers and you're just stuck staring, what do I do now? You still won't regret watching Twin Peaks.
Yeah. I
You will regret watching the last season of Game of Thrones.
Now, we don't intentionally necessarily try to shit on anything that's out there. If you like it, you like it. That's really the key thing. I just, when I say, I think something like Twin Peaks is an acquired taste. I don't think that's being ill-informed or letting people know, because I think a lot of what's out there on TV, while TV is of course extremely formulaic, and we've talked about Twin Peaks being a Dan Curtis production. I've talked about the Quinn Martin stuff from The Invaders, the Everyman episode like The Fugitive, The Incredible Hulk, all these things, week to week episodic stuff, the format of it, right? You get familiar with it, and now everything's, oh, let's set something up and call it a limited edition. Let's introduce all these characters. Let's do all this stuff with it. And by everybody's description of almost any show out there, they can sit there and say, you know what, you just got to give it to about episode 4 or 5, and it really starts to sink in. And I'm like, bullshit. I don't want to go to season or episode 4 or 5. I don't care if there's Yellowstone, 1923, 1899, 1776,
I like
1066. I don't give a shit. If I don't care about the characters, no matter how many different groups you like the show, why bother? And that's why when Tulsa King was a show that came out, and we reviewed it here on the Xtreme Movie Show, it's different because it's anchored around Stallone, and I think it's deliberately different than Yellowstone and all those shows. And while they're wildly successful, they're all exactly the same type of show, just variations on a theme. And if you like that, that's great. So it just wasn't doing it for me. And I go back to Twin Peaks immediately within 5 minutes. Guy's got a bitchy wife. He's going out to do his guy thing. He's an old man. Got the homecoming queen dead. Boom. What the hell? And immediately before the first commercial break on regular TV, without language, without nudity, without anything, shock value wise, you're going, huh, what's going on? And then you find out some of the characters, and then it gets a little creepy, and then you're like, holy shit. And the last thing I'll sit there and say is, a lot of people like to talk about Hitchcock being a master storyteller. And the old description you hear everywhere on YouTube or in writing is that, well, Hitchcock's the kind of guy that will show two people talking, across from each other, and underneath the table, you see somebody slide a bomb over, and we know it's going to blow up. So we get, on the edge of our seats, and we don't know what's going to happen. And oh my God, and it's going to build tension and all that. And then the release and what's going to happen. And it includes an everyman too, right? To make us feel like we're being on screen, allegedly. And I go, yeah, I guess that's cute. But I was kind of like more of the Twin Peaks, where I don't fucking know who this character is. So I immediately don't trust them, but I don't trust them. I'm watching them. They may have something about their character that I find intriguing or interesting that keeps me watching them. And I think that active focus on the characters developing and showing you the layers getting unfolded is infinitely better than saying, okay, here's a situation, now how do they get out of it? I think it's a totally different type of idea. And I'm not saying either one's necessarily better or worse. I'm saying for me, though, I prefer the Twin Peaks approach. And that's why to this day, I still say it's one of the better shows out there because of how it does that. And it does it in a way where, again, even if you don't care about some of the characters like Bobby Briggs, when you see him in season 3 and you realize, yeah, his dad may have seemed like a shitty father because he's old school and stern. And then you realize, no, he was a pretty damn kick-ass kind of guy. And then you see him as a sheriff now in Twin Peaks and a little bit soft in his old age. You're like, wow, did he mature? Boy, did I read that wrong early on? But you get it. It's got more depth to it than a lot of this other stuff that's out there.
I realize that we're close to the end, but when you talked about when you talked about how there's not a lot right now that's like this, I do have to go ahead and say that while Game of Thrones did end a few years ago, a few years before that, I think one of the closest things, actually, oddly enough, is Breaking Bad, which is also has ties to drugs, so it works out. There's something in these shows, these core television shows, that will always live on. Even now, we're celebrating Twin Peaks Day, and while your tweet may not have gotten the views that it should have, it's going to survive past us. It's going to be looked at in a vault 100 years from now, and it's going to be one of those shows. It's just odd and quirky enough to do it, but it's also just good enough to do it.
Yeah, I'll comment on what's here in chat before we call it a night, about Johnny and Ed talking about, I'd asked them if they had seen it. And I think the thing with Twin Peaks is it's a show that you can kind of say pick up and watch season 3 and go, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but here's characters. I guess they've got stuff going on. You and I made the comment that some people would say, well, if you watch season 1, it makes a lot more sense. But if you watch season 1, season 2 there can be a slog in it, but it has its own, I guess, character, if you will. And some of it makes more sense and is fleshed out to the best of what Mark Frost could do, because Lynch had moved on to other things basically. But the movie Fire Walk with Me, which came out after season 2 when it got canceled, really did a good job of kind of making you feel like it was season 1. It was a bit dark, and it really showed the stuff that only got talked about in season 1. And made you feel kind of creepy and disgusted for watching. And I thought, even though the movie, I don't recall that it did well at the time. I remember when it was out, I think 92, 93, people were like, yeah, whatever, Twin Peaks, that's canceled. Who cares? Who gives a shit about the movie? But a lot of people like you and I who watched it in order and reviewed it go, you know what? It does make a lot of sense. It does make you think, shit, this was pretty good. And it instead of ending out on a whimper, you're kind of like, damn it, this movie kind of rekindled a little bit of serious interest in it too. And then when season 3 comes in, like I say, after that long layoff, all the stuff that comes up in season 3, and you can go, okay, that makes sense if you see what happens in season 2. And some of the throwaway stuff in season 2, I always talk about Harold, the orchid guy, and just how weird, bad shit out of the blue that is, and the whole cream corn thing, a little kid. You get stuff like that in season 3, but if you didn't see that in season 2, you're going, what the fuck? And I can understand people going, it's not making sense. And because it's true, that's why I say it visually can be a lot to take in, but that's why I think people enjoy talking about it, because they're trying to figure out what's going on. And that's part of the excitement of the watching, is not only do you enjoy it and maybe feel moved about it, or you like some quirky things, some of it doesn't make sense. You're like, bro, you got to help me out here. I don't get the whole cream corn thing and puke in it. And then when you realize, wait a minute, why would a writer put something like that in? Well, maybe there's a mythology behind it. We talked about the Dark Woods and how there was a Native American component to it, and the Owl Cavern and all this other stupid ass shit. But at least by the sense of what's going on in the show and their rules, Mark Frost, like I say, still does a decent job of tying all that stuff together.
Yes, I agree. I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie, if you recall, actually. But it is a part of it that does display something that we knew had happened, and it was good for us to go ahead and see that terrible, terrible time. But I did kind of gloss over it in my mind. I forgot it existed for a hot minute there, and that was a good minute.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, and it's like when you think about it, you don't have to see the movie, but it helps.
Yeah.
So like I say, if you think about it in terms of themes, season 3 and what's going on, even though you get a bunch of new characters in season 3, it kind of makes sense. And you definitely get a heavy dose of Dale if that's your jam. So I don't know. I did like it. It's a bit more of an intense watch, I think, though, too. It's not as it's a lot more, I think, mystical and spiritual than, say, season 1, where you could
It's a
honestly just
lot
watch
more
it all as
Lynch,
detective. Yeah, it is. It's definitely more Lynchian,
less
and
Frost.
yeah, at least visually and all that too. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm sure we'll revisit again in a couple years too, whether it's a podcast format or something else too, because it is that interesting about it. Whenever I read something online or people tell me about it, I'm like, oh yeah. And again, to me, it's kind of one of the gold standards that we go back to when we talk about how to tell a story, how to do television. And I think some of the things that people forget is that when you do a film's visual. So while the music can help, you can like the characters. Everyone always wants to talk about the story. I go with the Yngwie Malmsteen approach to music making. Is the same thing as movies. Is that you know there's no such thing as less is more. More is more. More is better. More is great. Let's go. Let's do it. And the idea here is that it's the music that matters. And if the lyrics aren't always as good, who really gives a shit? Half the time you can't.
You are never going to defend James's song. I'm sorry.
I'm not trying to.
Only
defend
you is still
just
shitty.
you, only you, whatever the hell it is. But the fact that there's something so lame and bad in there is it's pretty interesting as well too. Yeah. All right, guys. I think we're gonna just call lid on it here tonight. Here, really. I mean, we've entered the town of Twin Peaks, got away from Pine Hills with all the stuff that's been going on, and we'll be back again on Sunday night. And I believe, if I'm correct, unofficially, I'm going to announce that it's going to be Cocaine Bear. And then Tuesday night, we'll be playing with Gerard Butler. RDB and I will be tackling that. Actually, a pretty decent movie. Yes, Cocaine Bear is about, cocaine that falls from, I guess, a drug dealer's plane, and the bear gets into it, and mayhem ensues, and lets shenanigans begin. And unfortunately, they downplay it in terms of comedy effect, whereas I thought immediately after seeing the trailer, man, if they tried making this a serious horror movie, it'd be a hell of a lot more fun. But I can't wait to talk about Cocaine Bear and Plane over the next 2 broadcasts here on the Xtreme Movie Show. Anything you need to plug there, Professor Pixel?
Well, I suppose I should go ahead and say that I do a review for another show of mine that's close to my heart. Even more than Twin Peaks, I must admit, even on this blessed day. And that's Doctor Who, Mad Men with a Box. We do a live stream every Wednesday, 11:30 Eastern. And then, of course, like he said about Sunday, that's a movie. But before that, do not forget to watch our review of episode 11, right?
Correct.
11 of Dark Shadows, a Dan Curtis production.
Good night, Johnny, Ed, everybody else in chat. Twin Peaks Day. So we just wanted to kind of riff a little bit and reflect and all that. But I can't wait to talk about Cocaine Bear. Good night, guys. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching that. Thanks for letting people know that we exist here now as we continue our march to 1,000 and actually almost having a little bit of a pulse on YouTube. That's kind of cool, actually, and it's because of your engagement that happens.
And we ask you to please make sure to always remember that Twin Peaks is a David Lynch production.
I don't know why he does it, but that's what he does. So, guys, have a good night. And as always, stay extreme. Later.
Good night.
He does have that kind of a voice.
Yeah. He has a YouTube channel, and I think we're still live, but he has a YouTube channel where he talks about the weather, and